Good. I waited until you took a drink before I said it.
Okay, now, I met Steve down in Texas, but Steve and I have been talking on the phone for quite some time, and we are the same in many different ways. We both feel that the insurance people have been screwing over the homeowners for so long, and we see this kind of almost like a ministry, what we do. For us, God is in everything that we do. So, one thing you're going to find out is that there's no such thing as a gray line with Steve. It's a black line, and we do not cross it. And we do exactly what we need to do for the client, and we're going to build and design exactly a case that's going to be foolproof, because they're poorly trained, we know it, and now we're going to show it. And the best person I know how to do that, Steve happens to run, in my personal opinion, the largest appraisal company in the country, and he wants to grow it and build it, and he's looking for good quality people to bring also onto it. So this is another reason why you definitely want to make sure that you go to thecompletemettour.com, scroll down, fill out that form, and make sure that you get your information. I'm going to be banging that till you all get your copies of his book, because I've been telling you, I've been reading it, I've been loving it. Okay, and we're going to be putting in at least 3 or 4 more copies of different books that he has into the site. He actually, give him a round of a thank you for that. And so, without ado, and with a brother in Christ, Steve Patrick.
Thanks. Well, y'all like the way I dressed today? So my baggage went to San Jose, California last night with all my clothes and everything. So this is what I wore yesterday. Nice, huh? All right, so why should you listen to me? Well, I started out as a contractor 15, 20 years ago, and I used to battle insurance and companies. And then I became an adjuster. Things had gotten really slow in Dallas-Fort Worth doing contracting, and I had gotten my adjuster's license. The reason why I'd gotten my claims adjuster's license is when I met other adjusters as a contractor, I would show them my license and say, hey, look, I'm an adjuster too. And back then, they would go, oh, well, in that case, and they become a lot more amicable and easy to talk with, and back then that worked. And things had gotten really slow in Dallas. There wasn't much hail or wind losses going on. And then 4 hurricanes hit Florida at the same time, so I decided I'm going to go work some claims. And so I worked Hurricane Ivan, did even some flood work after the wind work, and then I did Wilma, I did Katrina, I did Ike, I did all those hurricanes in between. The last claims I ever did as a claims adjuster was Hurricane Sandy. I think I did about 18 entire school districts on Long Island. That was nice. High school buildings, middle school buildings, elementary school buildings. And so I started my own school. I saw how abysmal the claims adjusters were trained, so I started my own school, called it the CIA Training Academy. Clever little name that you could remember. Catastrophe Insurance Adjuster is the CIA. And so I wrote a curriculum for that. So I wrote 3 books for claims adjusters, teaching them how to adjust claims, how to properly scope claims. And then Vail National Training asked me to come and teach with them. So I was training claims adjusters with them. Someone mentioned Vail earlier today. They're one of the largest and oldest training companies in the U.S. Yeah. So I trained for them for a while. I actually thought that I could be a change agent on the claims adjusting side and actually teach them how to properly scope losses, because they didn't know how to properly scope losses. I actually thought I could be a change agent. And then I come to the realization about 2 years ago that they don't want me to be a change agent. And I didn't want to believe this was true. I didn't want to believe that the industry didn't want to be accurate. And they don't. They just want the adjuster to do what they're told, and that's it. And so I decided, fine, I'll go back to my roots. And so now I go around the country training contractors how to properly write estimates and how to get these estimates bought. And so I do conferences all around, and I train contractors, MPAs, on how to do that. And so today's talk is how to improve your buy ratio, how to overcome unreasonable and uncooperative claims adjusters. Has anyone in here ever met an uncooperative claims adjuster? Yeah, one or two? So I'm in the right place? So this is the name of our company, Level the Playing Field. David and Goliath, that's right. Sometimes we feel like that. So dealing with difficult insurance companies are about to get a lot easier, because I'm going to teach you some strategies and techniques on how to deal with difficult people. So, now here's a lofty goal. Vastly improve how storm restoration contracting is done in America. Actually radically transform the industry. That's actually the goal of our company, is to radically transform how storm restoration contractors and roofers do business in America. Real quickly, honesty and ethics in professions. So, y'all have heard of the Gallup poll before, right? So they do all these polls. They did a poll to honesty and ethics in professions, and they wanted to find out what professions had the highest honesty and ethics. And what do you think that is? The number one industry, if you've heard my talk before, don't say anything.
Doctors.
Doctors, you're close. Nurses. Of all the professions, 84% say high or very high. They believe that nurses have high ethics. Why do you think that is? Because they're not in it for the money, are they? At least that's our perception. Our perception is that nurses aren't in it for the money. And to the consumer, do they think that we're in it for the money? They probably do. And so what do you think about, they think about our honesty and ethics? So how about we not focus on our fee? How about we focus on serving the client and getting them a righteous outcome? Now, when I use that word righteous, it doesn't mean self-righteous. It means what's right. What's the first 5 letters of the word righteous?
Right.
What's right? So that they get every penny they have coming. Not a penny more, not have a windfall, but indemnified, indemnification. Now, who here knows what that means, that word? Yes. What does it mean?
Be made whole.
To be made whole. Imagine a piece of pie, imagine a cherry pie with a slice cut out. And to be made whole, now you have a whole cherry pie again. You had a slice cut out, there's some loss, and now you're back to the whole cherry pie again. So, nurses, 84%. Pretty good. Building contractors, 2%. Very high. Wow.
Right.
Now they didn't have roofers and storm restoration contractors or PAs on here, but at least 23% say high, so that's 25%. Do you think that as an industry we could raise the bar a little? Okay, so one of the things is, do y'all ever remember the story of the Aesop's fable, the 4 oxen and the lion? Y'all remember this? All right, so as long as the 4 oxen are tail to tail, the lion doesn't mess with them. Why is that? Because they're going to get a horn no matter which way they come in. Okay, so this is the Aesop's fable. But when the oxen start disagreeing with each other and they leave and they're not hanging out together anymore, guess what happens? Dinner. So, I want you to look to the left and to the right. Do you see each other as competition, a competitor, or do you see each other as a brother who we can be here to help each other? Because it's a world of difference, because I can tell you a lot of guys see each other as competition, say, no, I don't want to tell him my secret because that's my secret and I can make more money knowing this strategy or that strategy. How about we all help each other out, because we're all here to help the consumer, aren't we? I mean, is that the reason why we're here?
Yeah.
If we make serving the consumer our focus, then you don't have to focus on money because money will take care of itself. You'll have so much business if you focus on serving the client. You'll have so much business because your client will become your ambassador. You don't have to pay them for a referral. Say, I'll give you a referral fee. You don't have to do a referral fee because they're going to be telling everybody about you anyway if you serve them, because they can tell the difference between whether or not you're there to collect a fee or you're there to serve them. Correct? Of course they can. Did you see the movie 300 with the Spartans? A band of brothers, they held off this huge horde, 300 guys. Anybody know what the word koinonia means? It's Greek for band of brothers. That's right, a band of brothers. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm also talking about being above reproach. So, if you're going to go up against insurance companies who have bottomless pockets, and you have a chink in your armor, do you think they're going to find it and exploit it? So gentlemen, if you're going to be going up against these insurance companies, you have to be above reproach. That means no stretching the truth, no adding to the truth. Has anyone in here ever done that? Only me? Am I the only one that's raising their hand in the room? Why do you think I did that in the past? Now that was a long time ago, but I did do it. Why did I do that? Because I felt like I had to. And so my suggestion is that you be above reproach and not do that anymore. If you have done that in the past, then put it in the past and don't do it anymore. If you're not doing that, then great. Awesome. Okay. We teach storm restoration contractors and PAs how to short circuit what these estimators are told to say and do. How to disarm all their little talking points, which is what we were talking about. I didn't even know that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So that's one of the things that I do is, as I teach you how to question skillfully and listen carefully. In fact, write that down. It's one of the most important things you're going to hear. The person asking the questions is in control of the conversation. Has that ever occurred to you before, or have you been taught that? The person asking the questions is in control of the conversation. So you want to be the one asking questions when dealing with an adjuster. Now, one of the things I used to teach adjusters is how to control the conversation as a claims adjuster. And the way you do that is you ask questions and you're constantly moving. So if the adjuster is constantly moving, he's in control. So you stand still and have him stop so that you take control of the conversation. So I want to teach you how to question skillfully, and I want you to listen carefully to their answer, because their answer to your question is going to tell you what your next question should be. Okay. So the way to win when dealing with an adjuster is with facts and evidence, because they'll put a lot of opinion and conjecture forward. And if you can bring facts and evidence, like I was mentioning earlier, what authority does an adjuster have in investigating a loss to overlook and omit facts and evidence? Where would he get the authority to disregard facts and evidence? They don't have the authority to disregard facts and evidence. It doesn't exist. They have to take into consideration facts and evidence. They must. Otherwise, they haven't investigated the claim by definition, have they? So, that's what you're doing, is you're putting together facts and evidence, especially third-party source material. Write that down. Third-party source material. Now, one of the things I think I'm going to be talking about estimates tomorrow. Ray Choate was going to be talking about estimates, but he wasn't able to make it, so I'm going to be talking about how to create estimates tomorrow. And so tomorrow I'll be talking about smart estimates. And that's my book, Level the Playing Field, How to Overcome Unreasonable, Uncooperative Claims Adjusters. And you can get a free ebook copy of that. Mark told you how to do that, right? Everybody know how to do that? Go on his website? If not, go to Mark and ask him so you can get a copy. Now, everything that I teach is predicated on the fact that the damage is legitimate and the method of repair that you're recommending is reasonable. If the damage is legitimate and the method of repair is reasonable, then why wouldn't they agree with you? Because it's legitimate and reasonable. It's valid. So I want you to always be thinking legitimate and reasonable. In fact, we're going to talk about an opening statement. Method of repair is reasonable. Facts and evidence. Objective third-party source material. So, real quickly, I want you to write down this opening statement. When you meet the adjuster, and after you've done a little rapport and visited with him and say hi, talking about the kids, whatever, talk about the Dallas Cowboys. I'm from Dallas, so what do you expect? And so once you've done that, then I want you to make the following statement. Okay, write this down. I think that we ought to include everything that's legitimate and reasonable and strike everything that is not. Is that fair? So this is your opening statement. I think, or I believe, that we ought to include everything that's legitimate and reasonable and strike everything that is not. Does that sound fair to you? I've never had anyone say no. By asking that question, you just back them into the corner when they agree to it. And I'll tell you why in a second. I believe, what's that? I believe that we ought to include everything that's legitimate and reasonable and strike everything that is not. Does that sound fair to you? Most people want to believe that they're fair. So most people want to be fair. I've never had anyone say no to that when I ask that question. So later on when he says, well, we don't pay for drip edge, let's just say, or we don't pay for flashings. So if we're going to strike something, then it must then therefore be what? Illegitimate or unreasonable. Otherwise, because we've already agreed that we're going to include everything that's legitimate and reasonable and strike everything that is not. Did we not agree on that? Yes. And if you're wanting to strike something, then help me understand how it's either illegitimate or unreasonable. Oops. They've just backed themselves into a corner. So how is the drip edge not legitimate or not reasonable? How is not cleaning the walls before you paint them, how is that not legitimate? So now they have to justify how their omission of this particular line item is either illegitimate or unreasonable, don't they? Because they agreed at the beginning. You like that? Yes. Basically, there's four kinds of adjusters. There's competent adjusters, and there's incompetent adjusters, correct? And there's adjusters who have authority, and there are those who do not. Have you ever met a competent adjuster with authority? Sure. Have you met an incompetent adjuster with authority? Sometimes. Not typically, but sometimes. How about one with competence that has no authority? This is becoming increasingly common. More and more of them are just being estimators now, and they're not really even adjusters any longer. And then, of course, you got the one who's incompetent and has no authority at all. You meet lots of college kids nowadays that don't know the difference between a ceiling joist and a rafter. I mean, they don't. Do they have the authority to say yes? So, we have guys out there, we're going out there and we're making an argument and we're trying to get them to say yes to something that they don't have the authority to say yes to, like overhead and profit. If they agree to overhead and profit, they could be fired. They could be. And so why do you want to waste your time trying to persuade someone who doesn't have the authority to say yes? So have you ever gone in a sales situation and you're trying to talk the wife into saying yes to something and the husband is the decision maker, or maybe the husband, you're talking to the husband and the wife is the decision maker? You're not going to get a yes, are you? No, because they're not the decision maker. It's the same thing. It's a waste of your time. So you want to be able to determine whether or not the adjuster you're speaking with has the authority to say yes. So you just ask them, do you have the authority to say yes to this? If not, then I need to speak to your supervisor and go up the ladder.
So that's how you qualify them?
The way I would actually do it, I would softball it a little bit more than that. I don't have unlimited authority to just say and do whatever I want. And I suspect that you don't either. All right? And since neither one of us have unlimited authority, I don't want to step on your toes and try to persuade you to do something that's outside the realm of your authority. So is this something that's within the realm of your authority? If not, then I understand. Because I don't have unlimited authority either.
And how about the dollar level?
Typically, that's for check writing. There are independent adjusters may not have the authority to write up a claim that's over a certain dollar amount, like a $100,000 loss. Like the very first storm I ever worked, that was the most that I could write for back then at the time. It was a $100,000 loss. So you ask to speak to someone who does have the authority. That way you're not wasting your time trying to persuade someone who can't say yes. It's a waste of time. So who does have the authority to say yes to this? Question skillfully, listen carefully. So we're going to master the art of persuasion. Learn how to persuade, how to leverage influence. All right? Now, during the inspection, that inspection is their rodeo. You have to realize that, okay? They've been hired to come out and perform an investigation. So you're going to be professional. You're going to smile, be polite, be friendly. So let me ask you, so if you've ever dealt with an adjuster or anything in life, when another person is arguing with you, do they ever persuade you when they're arguing with you? So what makes us think that if we're arguing with them, we're going to persuade them? Does that work? No, it just puts up people's defenses. And so if it doesn't work, why would we do it? So let's be smarter than that, okay? If they make a rude statement, well, all you PAs are like, all you guys, blah, 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 blah. So you do the hot potato. All us PAs are alike. So whatever the rude statement is, hot potato it back in their lap, and they go, well, yeah, and then they have to justify their statement, or they can back off of their statement. So if they make rude statements like that, hot potato it back into their lap in the form of a question. You have to become really adept at learning how to make questions. You can turn any sentence into a question, can't you? It just takes practice, doesn't it?
And a good vocabulary.
So are we going to practice it?
Are we going to practice?
We are, aren't we? I highly recommend that you, see, I learned this from learning to be a salesman. Zig Ziglar, Tom Hopkins, if you'll study their salesmanship courses, their sales courses, they will teach you the art of persuasion. They will teach you how to question, how to ask questions. Really good stuff. Master the art of persuasion. All right, so there's our opening statement. And we'll use our own statements to back them into a corner when they start making illegitimate or unreasonable decisions. Like we're not going to pay for that, or we don't pay for that. Those types of things. Did you get a chance to look over my scope of damages report? Now, so I was doing, I was adjusting a high school on Long Island, Hurricane Sandy. It's actually Superstorm Sandy. And I met this contractor who brought me his estimate, but it wasn't an estimate because there was no prices on it. It was just a scope of damages report. No prices. And I looked at it and I go, where are the prices? He cocked his head a little bit and he looked at me funny. He goes, well, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? We haven't even agreed on a scope of damages yet. Wow, good question. He was 100% right. So what I recommend is that when you meet the adjuster is that you don't take an estimate to him. You take a scope report without prices. Because the objective of your first meeting is to come to an agreed scope of damages and a method of repair, not to come to an agreed price yet. That is putting the cart before the horse. So if you're going to use Xactimate as an example, when you go to print your report, you go to scope and you print out the scope. And it has just the quantities on it. So you have all your line items with your method of repair, and you have the quantities, you know, this many squares of roofing, so many linear feet of gutter, whatever the case may be, right? And no price. Because the objective of your initial meeting is to come to an agreed scope of damages and a reasonable method of repair. Then, once you have that, price takes care of itself. If they're using Xactimate and you're using Xactimate, let's say, then the price is what it is. If you're using the same price database and no one's manipulating the price database, then you're going to have identical prices, won't you? So you want to come to an agreed scope of damages and method of repair first before you ever even talk about price. So don't even put price on there. They see overhead and profit on the last page, and all of a sudden they go off on this tangent about overhead and profit, and you've lost them. When you're there to talk about damages, and they're talking about overhead and profit. Does that make sense? So have you had a chance to look over my scope of damages report? Are there any line items on there that are illegitimate or unreasonable? Are there any line items illegitimate or unreasonable? If not, then great, we agree. So, if they say, well, yeah, I don't agree with line item 25, blah, 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 blah. All right? So are you saying that line item 25 is illegitimate, or are you saying that it's unreasonable? Remember our opening statement? What was it? I think we ought to include everything that's legitimate and reasonable and strike everything that isn't. And if you're wanting to strike that line item, then you must therefore have concluded that it's either illegitimate or unreasonable. So help me understand your position. Is it illegitimate or is it unreasonable? My favorite question, we talked about this earlier. Why do you say that? Which is a nice way of saying put up or shut up. In other words, what you're saying, what is the basis and foundation for your position? If you're saying that we ought to omit this particular line item, then why do you say that? Isn't that just an obvious question to ask? Most people don't think to ask it, do they? So why do you say that? Help me understand. Even add that little tag on the end. Help me understand. Another thing I mentioned earlier that I love to say, I say this every single time when I meet these guys. You know what? You could be right about this and I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. So help me understand where you're coming from. That will soften the other person many times. And you know what? Have you been wrong before? So then what you're saying is true. I have been wrong before. So you may very well be right, so help me understand. You don't think that they are, you think that you're right, but at least it opens up the conversation and you find out where they're coming from. It could be they've just been told to say that. And it's like they're like a parrot and they're just parroting back what they've been told to say, and they've never even thought this through as to why that they're saying the things that they're saying. Where are your facts and evidence to back up your position? So what is the basis and foundation for your position? Essentially, that's your question. Another way you can say it, how did you draw that conclusion? Very powerful question. How did you draw that conclusion? So this is old damage. Okay, I understand. So how did you draw the conclusion that this is old damage? Where did you draw that conclusion? That's a good question. Help me understand how you drew that conclusion. Hold his feet to the fire. Make him justify his conclusion regarding the construction. Someone brought up at lunch about rotten decking. You don't argue that the carrier owes for rotten decking, Brian, right? You don't bring up that they owe for rotten decking. They owe for access to a stable, nailable surface to be able to install the replacement roof. Doesn't the crew have to have access to a stable, nailable surface to install the roof? That's the argument, is access. carriers always pay for access, but they never pay for rotten decking. And those two arguments are 180 degrees out. So sometimes it's not what you say, but how you say it. We don't pay for that. So you don't dispute that this line item is legitimate and reasonable then. Do you see what I'm asking? They're not disputing that it's legitimate and reasonable. They're just saying, well, I don't care that it's legitimate and reasonable. We're not going to pay for it anyway. That's what they're saying. So that's what you want to get them to come to the realization that that is what they're saying. Are you saying that you don't care if it's legitimate and reasonable, you're not going to pay for it anyway? Surely I misunderstand what you're saying. Nope, that is what they're saying. So you don't dispute that this particular line item is legitimate and reasonable then? No, they don't dispute it. Then why are you omitting legitimate and reasonable line items from your estimate? That's a very good question. They're going to start squirming real soon. Yes?
Nothing is written in this conversation, but would estoppel come into play here?
Are you all familiar with waiver and estoppel? Did y'all hear his question about waiver and estoppel? Essentially, what that is remember we talked about what a waiver was? A person has a right and they forego that right. So the carrier has the right to reserve the right to deny claims. All right? There are certain actions they can take or fail to take that can waive that right, and then they can be stopped from denying coverage. That's what he's talking about. And so what I used to teach adjusters in my adjuster school is if you have reason to believe that a claim may be denied, and you just go on and continue your investigation, and you don't stop and say, oh, wait a second, you know what, there may be an issue here. If you just continue your investigation, then what does the insured imply from your just continuing with the investigation? That everything is hunky-dory. And all of a sudden they get a letter, a reservation of rights letter. And they go, well, what's this? He never brought anything up about this when he was at my house. Oops. Yep. So that can be an issue if they lead you to believe that something's covered and they don't bring it up at the time. That could be a problem for them. That's the reason why they send out the reservation of rights letter, for that very reason, so that it's known, they're letting you know that that there may be an issue, and we're reserving all of our rights, including the right to deny a claim.
Steve?
Yes.
We're in a active claim right now where that day one right out of the gate, reservation of rights was pushed in our face. But that doesn't give them, what's the fancy word, carte blanche, to start talking to, in this case, church members, and they haven't even visited the site yet.
Yep.
And they're calling members and saying, yeah, the roof has always been leaking off and on for, you know what I'm saying? So they give us this reservation of right thing in the face, on the one hand, then the next week, they literally started talking to people they had no right to talk to and started getting statements from. I mean, how do you get around that or stop it? Are you saying we can't stop? That's part of their legitimate investigation? Is that what you're saying?
Sure. Of course it is.
All right.
You bet it is.
Okay.
And if the parishioners want to talk, then they talk.
It's America.
Yeah. And so you need to be able to formulate a response to that. Yes, there were some small leaks in the back, but the leaks right over the pulpit right here didn't occur until after the date of the loss, or whatever your argument's going to be.
You saw it dripping in the closet, but now
That's right.
it didn't. Got it.
Yep. The valley metal isn't damaged, so we're not going to include it, or something like that. Have you heard this? All right. So a particular building material doesn't have any direct physical damage, so we're not going to include it. So then you can ask, well, why are you including the felt? That's a good question. They're including the felt, aren't they? Is there any direct physical damage to the felt? You know why they're including the felt? Because it's part of the roof system. That's why. So, if they're going to replace the roof, they need to replace the whole roof system, because it is that. It's a system. Imagine this. Imagine if you're driving along and you get T-boned, and you're not injured, and your auto insurance company decides to total your car, but then they come along and say, you know what? The cost to replace your car is $30,000, but we're going to take $10,000 off because there was no direct physical damage to the engine, the transmission, or the rear end. Imagine if they were to say that. The courthouses would be filled with lawsuits against them, and the juries would just have a heyday, wouldn't they? They would eat them alive. And that's essentially what they're saying. Isn't that absurd? So, you can even use that analogy. All right, here's another analogy. So, imagine a contractor, well, that's another story. Never mind. With all due respect, what facts and evidence do you have to support your position regarding omitting legitimate and reasonable line items? What facts and evidence do you have? Because I'm putting forth facts and evidence to support my position, these line items should be included. Do you have any facts and evidence supporting your position that they ought to be omitted? And what you'll hear is crickets, because they don't have any facts and evidence. In fact, they've never even been asked these types of questions before. They won't know how to answer. They're going to be on the phone with their supervisor. Do you have any objective third-party source material that you're basing your position on? No. It's opinion and conjecture. Regarding pricing, if they come back and say, hey, the price that you're charging is too high, say, look, my client has already submitted themselves to Xactimate pricing. Already submitted themselves to insurance company pricing by using Xactimate, because who owns Xactimate? ISO, Insurance Service Office, and they don't service you, I assure you. So what do you want from me, a pound of flesh? If you've already submitted yourself to Xactimate pricing, you're not obligated to do so, are you? By no means. What if they continue to be reasonable? So you go up the ladder, you talk to the supervisor, you talk to the claims manager, you talk to the vice president of claims, you work your way up the ladder, and if they refuse to be reasonable, what then? Well, basically, you have, as PAs, you have three choices. You can take it on the chin, and some guys do because they don't know what other option. You can always refer to an attorney, and you can litigate. And there is a third option called appraisal. Are you familiar with it? How many people here are familiar with appraisal? About 2/3 of the room. Is it really the magic bullet? I wouldn't call it the magic bullet, but I would say that I've been doing them for 18 years, and I've done almost 2,000 of them. And we have a really decent track record. Do you know how we win an appraisal? The same way lawyers win in trials, with facts and evidence. See, when Chip goes and he's facing off with the carrier attorneys, they know to bring facts and evidence. But in appraisal, the other appraisers are lazy. They don't do it. They don't bring facts and evidence. They don't go out and get objective third-party source material to back up their position.
On the insurance company side.
On the insurance company side. And so we have facts and evidence to support our position, and they have none. So the scales of justice go like this. Facts and evidence win. And see, you're not dealing with obstructionists. So you ever feel like you're banging your head against the wall working with carriers? There's 4 main advantages to appraisal. All right, so let's talk about the first one. Circumvention. You literally circumvent the claims department in appraisal. They have one piece of input into the entire process, and what is that? Naming their appraiser. So they name their appraiser, you and the insured name your appraiser, and the two name an umpire. The naming of the umpire, the carrier has nothing to do with that. The carrier has nothing to do with any of the rest of it. you've, in essence, circumvented the claims department. You've circumvented the brick wall. Haven't you? Now, that is if, well, you have circumvented them. Here we bring up the second one, independence. So, if the other appraiser is dependent and taking instructions from the carrier, then that turns the entire process into a farce. It's a farce. All right? Many of the appraisal clauses state that the two appraisers shall be competent and independent. Some of them state competent and unbiased, and there's a difference. So what does independent mean? Independence means the state or condition of being free from dependence, subjection, or control. Anyone ever know an insurance company to be a control freak?
Most likely.
Boy, they do not like to release control to the appraisers. So, what does independence mean? It means that we're not supposed to be being told as appraisers what to say, think, or do. It's very easy for a competent appraiser to be able to discern when the appraiser is using carrier speak. In other words, they're saying what they've been told to say. And so if you're dealing with a competent appraiser, they'll be able to pick up on that very quickly. And let me say that appraisal is not the place for rookies to try to learn how to do things, because you're going to be stuck with the outcome. If you're going to hire an appraiser, you'd better hire a good one who's experienced, because you're going to be stuck with the outcome. Because to get an appraisal overturned, to get an appraisal vacated, you're going to have to prove fraud, collusion, malfeasance, gross error. Gross error is going to be the easiest to prove of those four. It's going to be very difficult to prove those. Reasonable cost. So these prices used to be half of that 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, have any of y'all ever heard of the PLRB? Property Loss Research Bureau? So they have these huge conventions that all the adjusters come to regionally, all over the U.S., where they teach adjusters all kinds of things. One of the things they do is they teach them how to do appraisals. One of the newest things they've been doing is they've been teaching the appraisers to dig in their heels and to delay the appraisal. And in the course of delaying the appraisal, what it does is it causes the insured to get frustrated. They'll throw up their hands in disgust and say, "I'll just forget the whole thing." And the carrier goes, "Next." That was easy. Next. So you have to explain to your client that although that appraisal can be a quick resolution. So let me give you a quick example. I actually completed one in 10 minutes a month ago. So this appraiser called me up and he goes, "So if I understand correctly, the only thing in dispute is overhead and profit." And I said, "That's correct." And he said, "Well, it looks to me like there's 5 trades on this loss." I said, "That's right, there are 5 trades." He goes, "Well, why are we even in appraisal?" I said, "That's a good question." And we signed the award. We added 20%. I got a reasonable person. We signed the award. Took me 10 minutes. Now that's atypical, but that is an actual example of what happened. And but nowadays they're starting to dig in their heels and starting to delay things. And sometimes it's difficult to push a rope. So yes.
Did you have an umpire pick before you went to the...
I always have an umpire pick before we talk to anybody. That's always the very first thing that you do. In fact, the policy states you shall first name an umpire. That's what the appraisal clause says. Imagine what happens if, let's say that I'm doing an appraisal with somebody that I've done appraisals with a great many times. And let's say that the other guy's reasonable, we come up with a number, and the insurer doesn't like it, and he says, "Did you first name an appraiser, an umpire?" And I say, "No, because I deal with this guy all the time." He goes, "Then you didn't follow the appraisal clause, so therefore I'm going to sue you for the outcome because I don't like this outcome." Oops. You always name an umpire first because the appraisal clause says that's what you do. Besides, You could come to an impasse with the guy, and you couldn't agree that the sky's blue. And then how are you going to agree on an umpire later if you can't even agree on simple things to do with the claim, you know? Timely. Your typical residential hail or wind loss takes about 3 to 4 months. So I got some case studies in that flyer that was handed out that shows some of the more recent ones that we've done. Now, sometimes a carrier will say that you have to ask for a reinspection or send in a supplemental request before going to appraisal. My understanding is technically that's not correct. However, it's smart to pick your fights. So why not ask for another adjuster, a different adjuster, and send in a supplemental request and a reinspection request? A supplemental claim and a reinspection request. Why not? You might get a reasonable person. We find about 10 to 20% of the time the claim can be resolved by having another adjuster come out. Now, extensions of coverage. Once the carrier has extended coverage for a loss, let's say it's a hail loss. Let's use that as an example. And they say, well, I don't see any damage to the roof, but I see one hail dent here on the gutter, so I'm going to pay for this 3 feet of gutter. Have they extended coverage for that hail loss? Yes. Once they've accepted liability, then everything is appraisable in most states. There may be some differences from state to state, so you need to know your state's laws. But generally speaking, once they've accepted liability and extended coverage, the only remaining question is the amount of the loss, isn't it? And that's what the appraisal clause is all about. It says if you and we disagree on the amount of the loss, either may demand appraisal. The amount of the loss is what appraisal is about. It doesn't matter who owes for what in appraisal. It's outside the realm of our authority. Now, it makes a difference in you guys, who owes for what. Does the policy extend coverage for this boathouse sitting over water on this wind loss? Well, you know what? Most homeowners' policies exclude damage to buildings wholly or partially over water for hail, wind, and hurricane. And so in that particular case, they don't owe for the damage to the boathouse, or to the satellite dish, or the antenna, or the lead-in wiring, or the greenhouse and their contents. Y'all know this list, right? Trees, shrubs, they're not covered for hail, wind, and hurricane? Okay. So, you need to know what your coverages are. You need to read the policies and know what the extensions of coverage are, what the limitations are. Like many of the policies do extend coverage for L&O, law and ordinance, but they limit it to 5,000, or maybe some of the state farm policies will have 10% of the dwelling policy limits will be the limit on L&O as an example. Pricing is always appraisable. General contractors' overhead and profit is pricing. So we handle what we call desk appraisals all the time. Desk appraisals when the only thing in dispute is the price. So you and the adjuster have come to an agreed on the scope of loss and the method of repair, but the only thing remains in dispute is the price. And so is there any need for us to go out and do a site visit to take a look at and touch price? No. So that's what we call a desk appraisal. They cost a lot less because we don't have any travel expense and we don't have a site visits. Right? Always appraisable. So we talked about you getting a free copy of my book. So here's the process. You hire appraiser A, the carrier hires appraiser B, and the two appraisers shall first name an umpire. The umpire, many times the umpire is never even activated because the two appraisers come to an agreement, they determine the amount of the loss, and in most states, 99% of the time, it's binding on both parties. That's the reason why I was saying you better pick an experienced appraiser. So let's say that you and a buddy, your buddy has one that's an appraisal, and you have, or one that you want to go to appraisal, and you have one that you want to go to appraisal, and you say, I'll do yours if you do mine. and your buddy doesn't know what he's doing, and then you come up with a bad award. And then what? You're stuck with it. Because what does it mean that the award shall be binding? What does that mean? Picture someone all tied up in ropes. You can't get out. You can't get out of it. This is what they're going to get, and that's it. So you better make sure that you hire a good appraiser. Yes?
When you go to appraisal, do you get the two other adjusters' reports, or you just go on your own? So, right from
Yes. His question is, as an appraiser, are you going to review the adjuster's estimates? Yes. I'm going to review the adjuster's estimates. I'm going to review your estimate. I'm going to review the contractor's estimates. Is it going to dictate my appraisal on the amount of the loss? No. It's just pieces of information. It's facts and evidence that I have. Some of it can be good and some of it may be bad. But it's facts and evidence that I have. Sometimes, like I'm in one right now in, where's this at? Ohio. Up north of Cincinnati. And there's this room addition where the wind blew the roof off and the rain came in and it damaged the floor. And the carrier put in for a floating floor. My opposing appraiser didn't put in for that. So I wrote a letter to the umpire. I said, look, the carrier had already agreed to a floating floor. So in other words, the floating floor wasn't in dispute. Appraisers are supposed to do appraisals on the items not in dispute, not the items that are in agreement. If the carrier's already agreed to total the roof, then we're not here to determine whether or not the roof is totaled or not. That's not in dispute between the two parties. Once any two of the three on the panel agree on the amount of the loss, that settles the matter and the award is issued. Most carriers typically pay within 7 to 10 days after an award is issued.
Who names the umpire?
The two appraisers do.
They have to agree.
If the two appraisers don't agree on an umpire, then the policy states that most policies state that either party may go to a judge and have a judge appoint an umpire. Now, Farmers has a new next-gen policy that states that if the two appraisers come to an impasse, then AAA, the American Arbitration Association, is going to name the umpire. But
How does that benefit?
those are pretty rare.
How does that benefit them? Because they they wouldn't be named in a.
They're the ones paying AAA. That's how it benefits them. It's interesting though because in the Farmers Next Gen policy, both appraisers have to state they're unbiased. They have to agree in writing that they're unbiased. And once your opposing appraiser states that he's unbiased, then you can challenge his bias because he's signed the letters, the form stating that he's unbiased, right? And you can ask, how many times have you done appraisals for this particular carrier in the last year? Oops, a bunch of times. So sometimes the carriers aren't so smart and they put things in there that can be used against them. The award is issued to both parties. The award is binding in about 99% of the time, and the carrier must pay the award within a reasonable period of time. Most states have a prompt payment statute, and most of them are 30 days.
I did an appraisal and about that binding clause. They said 3 layers, but once we tore it up, it was 4 layers.
Oops.
You can't go back, right?
File a supplemental claim.
What's the,
Or what you can do is have the insured make an official request to bring the panel back in because there was hidden damage that the panel hadn't considered. Was that hidden damage? Yes. And so you request that the panel reconvene to be able to address matters that weren't considered before because it was hidden damage. It so rarely comes up. I had that happen once with one of my appraisers in Dallas where it was a tornado claim, that Rowlett tornado. And fortunately, they had USAA, and they said if you just file a supplemental claim, they'll pay it, and they did. After the award had been issued and payment made for the award. So, but that's pretty rare, but that's what I would do. I would ask for the panel to reconvene to be able to address issues of hidden damage that were overlooked before. So, this is why appraisal works, is because we bring facts and evidence, and our colleague, the other appraiser, rarely does, because they're lazy. It's just the truth. They're lazy. Right? And because of circumvention. Circumvention is huge. All right. So, if you may not be an expert at explaining what appraisal is and how it works, I have a YouTube video where I'm sitting there in front of a camera. It's not very exciting. Where I explain what appraisal is, how it works, and I answer about 95% of consumers' questions. And you can have them watch this little 8-minute video that explains it. And so there's the, you can write that down. And until you become good at explaining what appraisal is, you can just have them watch the video. We're going to talk about estimates tomorrow. I've been doing this 18 years, and my business partner, Tony, has been doing this 45 years. He's what's known as an executive general adjuster. Maybe one adjuster in 10,000 get to that level. He started working at GAB 45 years ago when to become a general adjuster was a big deal. They were real general adjusters back then. Questions and answers. This is my favorite part of the thing. Questions and answers. Y'all get to find out whether or not I really know my stuff.
Let's come up here, if you have a question. Or better yet, let me use the other mic.
Thank you, Steve. Am I on? Am I live?
If any,
Here's the camera.
while we're getting the microphone, if anybody would like to look through, I had one copy printed. And if anybody would like to look through my book, then please nobody swipe it. I've never had anybody do that, but I paid $130 to have this one copy made. It's the only physical one. Well, actually, you can make a copy if you want. So if you download the PDF and you take it to Staples or Office Max or whatever, and you can have your own copy printed. I'm in the process of completely rewriting this thing, and it's going to actually be into two sections. It's going to be the consumer section and the professional section. The consumer section is going to be for the consumer to read and study, and the professional section is for you guys and the contractors. Yes, Chase?
Where do we get the PDF?
Oh, so
Go to thecompletementor.com. You can go down on your cell phone right now, and you go down, you'll see a big form, you fill that out and submit it. It automatically will then take you to a page where you can actually download onto your cell phone, and also send you an email that you can then download it on your computer.
and then you take it to Staples or Office Max. Now, it does have a copyright on it, so if you take it to Staples and Office Max and they give you a problem, you have my business card, right? We handed out business cards. Have them call me, and I'll tell them that it's okay to do that, and they'll print it. I've had that happen a few times. So, yes.
Steve, I guess two questions. Number one, for those people here who do not know this particular term, I wonder if you could explain it. Field adjuster. And then the second question is a more general thing. There's a lot of jargon, like a lot of professions, brain doctors, foot doctors, whatever. They all have jargon and language and terminology. Can you give us some tips when we run into jargon spewing people and they start, using acronyms that's like XYZ what.com, or you know what I'm getting at?
Sure.
So terms, and then also can you explain to folks what a field adjuster is, that term?
You know why people use that type of jargon? They're trying to impress you.
Yep.
That's what they're trying to do. So instead of calling this a shoulder joint, you could call it the acromyoclavicular articulation. Now, why would you say that? Why not just say shoulder joint? Just say shoulder blade instead of scapula. I used to be a paramedic in my previous life, so I had to learn all those things. So a field adjuster, what is a field adjuster? He is an adjuster who only works in the field. He's not he's not a desk jockey. And there are two different kinds. There's staff adjusters and there's independent adjusters. And there's a big difference between them. A staff adjuster is an employee that works for the carrier, and he's trying to get promoted. He has a very different motivation than the IA. The independent adjuster, he gets paid on a sliding scale. So when I was adjusting claims, the higher I could get the claim, the more money I made. So my motivation is to try to include everything that's legitimate and reasonable. So if I had a PA meet me out there, I used to love it when I had PA show up. You know why? I have an assistant for free.
Yeah.
I need this, and this. Go get them. And I had a free assistant. I wasn't going to include anything that wasn't legitimate and reasonable anyway. And I'm going to address this tomorrow, but man, I meet lots of PAs that put stuff in their estimates that causes them to lose credibility. I'm going to address this tomorrow when we're talking about estimates. Don't do that. I'm going to teach you tomorrow how to write an estimate that is solid and has a lot in it, but you can justify every single line item in there as legitimate and reasonable with a straight face. Okay? So, if you get an independent adjuster, awesome. His motivation is very different than a staff adjuster.
You and I had talked about the capacity of using retired judges to try to, as I always say, stack the deck when it comes to, if it has to go to a court administrator who's going to determine what judge. And by the way, the court administrator usually has two different judges they use in every courthouse. The normal guy and then the guy that takes over when the other guy's not there. To basically have it so that you interview the judge, so you find out their opinion about insurance companies, so that you know you're not putting the wrong guy on your list. And then a judge will pick a judge, a doctor will pick a doctor, an attorney will pick an attorney, that kind of scenario. We talked about that.
I've seen scenarios where the judge will say, okay, this attorney sitting right here, that's who I'm gonna pick as the umpire. I love it when they pick attorneys as umpires. You know why? Because I always put together a brief explaining this is my position, this is how I drew my conclusions, here's the facts and evidence that supports my position, here's some objective third-party source material. They're used to seeing those sorts of things. And you know what my opponent brings? Nothing. Opinion and conjecture. And so what do you think, how do you think that the judge is going to rule when I bring facts and evidence and third-party objective source material and the other guy brings nothing? The scales of justice go like this. We win. That's why we win. It's because we actually have facts and evidence. For example, real briefly, general contractors' overhead and profit. So in my brief, I say there's 10 different reasons why we ought to, as a panel, include general contractors' overhead and profit. And I actually bring facts and evidence and third-party objective source material to back up my 10 points. And so what are their 3 points that they always bring up? Not enough trades, right? Not enough complexity, coordination. Those are the 3 things, right? That is utter, absolute nonsense. It's smoke and mirrors. Remember what I said earlier? It's a magician's trick. It's called misdirection. They don't want you to look at their left hand, so they're flopping their right hand around. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with the number of trades. They're trying to distract you from the issues at hand. Okay? So, is it reasonably necessary for them to have a general contractor? If they've already hired one, then the insured has determined that it is reasonably necessary, haven't they? And so that's always the first reason. All right? So.
By the way, do you have a list of the different 10 different reasons? Do you have a list of that?
They're in the book.
Oh, there you go. That's another reason why you want to get the book.
Yep.
Any other questions?
the one I come up against a lot is, the roofing system.
Yes.
We're not placing the roofing system, we're just replacing the shingles. And I know you said about the felt paper and all of that. Where's good references to give to them that say it is a roofing system?
Okay. The shingle manufacturer, if you can determine who the manufacturer of the shingle is, then you could go to their installation instructions, and the building code actually states that the manufacturer's instructions are building code. So that makes it building code to replace the entire roof system. Ed, what is the, do you remember? No, I'm saying, where is it in the code that says the manufacturer's installation instructions?
Right in the preface, I've got the...
905?
905.1.
Yeah, 905.1.
Three of them that talk about it.
Yep.
Now, with your roofing system, because they're always, soffit and fascia is not part of the roofing system, they keep saying.
And it's not. That would be correct. Just like gutters aren't part of the roofing system. It's in proximity, the chimney's in proximity to the roofing system, but it's not part of the roofing system.
Okay, but when you have...
It's a different trade.
Ventilation, and you need to be, so I have a claim, there's no ventilation in the roof, so proper code needs ventilation, 50% above, 50% or 60/40, whatever it is, but there's no, the soffit has no ventilation. So now is that not part, bringing that into that system now?
That's going to be a tough sell. I would pick my fights and not argue that one, personally.
Oh, thank you. I was just curious about who actually pays the fees ultimately for the appraiser.
Oh, good question. So the appraisal clause says each party will pay their appraiser's costs plus half the cost of the umpire. And what it implies to say is regardless of the outcome. Even if the insured is 100% correct on everything, half the price so the insured pays their appraiser's cost, unless you want to cover it, as a PA or an attorney would cover it. That happens. I have attorneys that hire me to do appraisals, and the attorney pays me. But typically it's the insured, or the carrier pays their appraiser. So I used to do appraisals for carriers, and they stopped using me. You know why they stopped using me? Because I wouldn't allow them to direct me, because I was going to remain independent. And they wanted to direct me, and I wouldn't allow that. The very last one I did was for National Lloyd's. It was a fire, and I had included for smoke and soot damage throughout the residence. And they go, why did you include for that? Because it exists. See, this is the thing about appraisal, is the purpose of appraisal isn't to determine what's owed, who owes for what, whether or not the carrier owes for things. The purpose is to determine the amount of the insured's loss. If something was part of their loss, it needs to be included whether it's covered or not. And then you guys can discuss the coverage aspect. But in appraisal, we have to include it. If it's part of their loss, we have to include it. That's what we're doing. We're determining the amount of the insured's loss. Even things that we know that aren't covered, like for example, I know that cloth awnings aren't covered for hail damage, as an example. All right, so I would put that in as a separate line item, but we would include it in the appraisal anyway, even though I happen to know that homeowners policies specifically exclude cloth awnings for hail damage, as an example. So I include it because is that part of the insured's loss? Yes, they're going to have to replace those cloth awnings. So it's part of their loss. So is the general contractor's overhead and profit part of their loss if they've entered into a contract saying that, with a contractor saying they're going to pay general contractor's overhead and profit? Yes. In fact, they've incurred that before they've even paid it. Did you know that? Did you know what the word incurred means legally? It doesn't mean that they've come out of pocket and paid something. It means that they've legally obligated themselves. That's incurred. So if a homeowner or a commercial property owner enters into a contract with a contractor to do work, and that contract says that we're charging general contractors overhead and profit 10 and 10, then that is incurred, because that's what the legal definition of the word incurred means. It's already incurred. Once they executed that contract, it's incurred. So that's a big reason why it should be included in the estimate, because it's been incurred. Yes?
Where can I find that definition so I can back that up?
Black's Law Dictionary. Yep, that's where I got it from.
Repeat that? The word? I heard, or no?
The legal definition of, Black's Law Dictionary.
Just as it sounds, B-L-A?
Yeah, you can download it as an app onto your phone. In fact, they have a 50-year-old version of the Black's Law Dictionary that you can download for free.
50-year-old?
Yeah. Oh, you can pay for the more recent version. And it's not inexpensive, because it's an attorney book, and attorney books are never inexpensive.
When you're looking for a judge, what qualifies a judge? Does it have to be a real judge, or a person that acts as a judge?
No. You have to read what the appraisal clause says. It typically says a U.S. District Court judge is what it typically says, most appraisal clause.
Okay.
Most appraisal clauses. If they don't actually specify, then you could go to a justice of the peace.
Can he be retired, judge?
No, it would have to be active, I would think.
Do you mean umpire?
You're talking about for umpires?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to name the umpire, yes.
Well, as far as the fees that was asked earlier about, so the insured pays the appraisal fee?
Yes.
And do you let them know right away?
So we charge $200 an hour, time and expense. We can't, appraisers aren't allowed to work on a contingency, like you guys work 10%, 15, 20%, whatever the case may be, state to state. They don't allow us to do that. So we work on a time and expense basis. So our company, our billing is $200 an hour for residential, $250 for commercial, $300 an hour for large commercial and complex commercial. And that's pretty much the sweet spot. There are people cheaper and less expensive, but that's, oh yeah, of course. But we don't know how many hours it's going to take.
What if they can't pay it? Then what? What if they can't pay it?
Or it's going to be taken on the process.
Well, what if they just can't do it?
Then they don't hire us.
But if it goes to appraisal in the end and you're stuck, what happens then? If they have no money to come up for an appraiser?
We always charge a retainer. So you're saying
You don't know
the client is broke.
It's going to go to an appraisal process. You don't know that ahead of time.
Yeah, we let them know how much we bill, the hourly rate and everything like that, and we let them know.
As a public adjuster,
yes,
we don't know if it'll go to appraisal in the long run.
Correct.
What if you get to that point and they can't afford it? Then what?
That's probably the least expensive way for them to get resolution, is through appraisal. If they can't afford that, then they're stuck, then they're going to have to take it on the chin.
You're stuck, basically.
You're stuck.
A lot of the carriers now are starting to invoke appraisal that we've seen, especially on, it seems like it's mysterious on clients that can't seem to afford.
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot more often.
Sure. In fact, the newest tactic is once an insured files suit, they immediately demand appraisal. It's a good time to be in the appraisal business.
You want me to talk? Okay, hey, something I wanted to tell you guys about real quick. Two things is State Farm, at least in my state, I'm assuming this is nationwide, but if you have an agreed cost of repairs and you submit that contract to State Farm, they will release the depreciation. So keep that in mind. They do it all the time with me. I can't say that they do it in all 50 states, but it's worth a try. Regarding the appraisal, make sure that you read the appraisal language as a public adjuster. One is you need to be mindful of it. Two is Allstate, if they invoke appraisal, will pay the insured's appraisals fee. I've seen that in some of their policies. So you make sure you read that and you understand that when you first get the policy. And then if you ultimately end up having to invoke or demand appraisal, first you know what the language is in the policy, and the language differs from state to state and from carrier to carrier. But keep that in mind, you guys need to really look at that, because when you go to demand appraisal, or if they demand it, sometimes it affects how things have to get paid.
In Illinois, if the appraisal panel awards 100% of the amount in dispute, what, Ed, what happens?
At that point, then the appraiser, the appraiser is entitled to 100% of the party that's hired the appraiser is entitled to 100% refund from the insurance company that they just won. But it has to be 100% match or
100%.
higher.
Good luck with that, though. 100%.
By the way, is there a guide on appraisal for all the different countries, for all the different states?
Some states have some really wacky laws. Like Massachusetts has a law that the insured hires the carrier's appraiser, and the carrier hires the insured's appraiser, and both have to be, citizens of the state of Massachusetts, which there's what, 23 citizens in the state of Massachusetts? So some of them have really wacky laws, and so it's important that if you're going to be a PA and you're going to be recommending and hiring appraisers, that you understand that state's laws, because some of them are different. Some of them are really different.
Steve, do you think that might be a good idea for us to come up with a guide for all the different states on appraisal?
It would be. I don't know when I'd have the time to do that, but it would be a great idea.
I know somebody can help.
Yeah, so Lori does appraisals for us, and Ed does appraisals for us, and so if any of you guys, we'd like to have an appraiser in every major city in the U.S., and so if one of you guys would like to discuss that with me, then give me your card, and Tony, he does all of our interviewing of all of our appraisers, and he does all the training. And so you'll be being trained by Tony Rugas, arguably the smartest adjuster that I've ever met, easily. So.
Actually, I've been through several appraisals, and I was surprised how stupid a lot of these appraisals are. They're very unqualified to be appraisers. I was very disappointed.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I'm standing here.
That's why you have a training for appraisal, and it convinced me. I know more than this appraiser.
Yes.
So I want to be an appraiser.
Yeah.
And I found out there's no license or qualification to be an appraiser.
You have to be competent, and you have to be either
anybody could
independent
say
or
they're
unbiased.
competent.
True. I mean, that is a requirement.
Right.
It may be a small threshold.
That's why I want to talk to you becoming an appraiser.
Yeah. And so I love dealing with incompetent appraisers.
Oh, then most of them are. And also, I have a question.
That's easy.
A second question is the time limit to bring an appraisal. Because I have like claim that I want to take an appraisal still, and they're over 1 year old.
I have personally never seen an appraisal rejected due to the length of time, because the statute of limitations from state to state is the statute of limitations to bring a suit. You're not bringing a suit. All you're doing is determining the amount of the insured's loss. So I've personally never seen that happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I've not seen that, and I've done almost 2,000 appraisals. And
so I could bring an appraisal on a claim that I did 3 years ago?
I believe so.
It's typically got to be brought in a timely manner, which is no real definition.
Yeah.
But there have been rulings on that.
Chase had his hand up anyway.
Yeah. The time at which you should bring an appraisal should be prior to the expiration of the statute of limitations. Because when you seek appraisal, you should seek it prior to the expiration of the statute of limitations. Now, again, this is state by state, policy by policy. Some states have definitive breach of contract and bad faith statutes of limitations. Other states allow the statute to be limited by policy. So you need to check your policy to see when your statute of limitations is. This is a practice that you should be doing ultimately as soon as you get a claim. Because if you have a 1 year statute of limitations and you come on 6 months after the loss, you need to determine whether or not you can get this thing wrapped up in 6 months or whether or not you need to send it to legal. Because ultimately, as licensed professionals, you have an obligation to your clients, and blowing a statute of limitations is a big problem. So always make sure to check your policies in your states for what your statute of limitations is. He had another question about appraisal. If you get an appraiser assigned to your claim, go ahead and ask the insurance company for his CV or his resume. Find out what that guy or girl's qualifications are that ultimately led the insurance company to assign them to the appraisal, because they do have to be competent. And they have to be impartial. The other thing you can ask for is a list of all of the prior workings that appraiser has done with the insurance carrier. If you get a list back that shows that they hire him every single day, he might not be so impartial. If you don't ask the questions, you'll never get the answers. Ask the questions.
What would you think, why would you think they would give you that information?
Because I think if you don't ask for it, perhaps your appraiser can ask for it. It should be something they should readily provide or readily be able to provide. If they're not providing it and you run into issues with either competency or bias, then you may have some sort of potential arguments to either push it to a different appraiser, get a different umpire, things like that. But these are questions you should be asking.
You're going to want to familiarize yourself with the appraisal clause. So you guys are studying and reading every policy, right? When you bring in an insured, you're reading their policy. Make sure you read the appraisal clause. Familiarize yourself with the clause so that if they have something different in their appraisal clause than what you typically see, you can point that out to the appraiser if you're going to be doing the referral, referring them to an appraiser, or hiring an appraiser yourself as the PA. Then you want to be able to point out. In fact, I would go so far as to say that it would be smart that if you're going to hire an appraiser to handle this, is that you include the appraisal clause for them to be able to read and study and make sure what the verbiage is in any given appraisal clause.
In that situation, as you mentioned earlier, where you file a claim and the insurance carrier immediately invokes the appraisal clause, would that be grounds, and this is probably for the attorney, but wouldn't that be considered bad faith? They didn't even give us a chance to meet and come together on the scope of it, and they're immediately saying, nope, let's take this to appraisal.
Bad faith isn't any one act. Okay? There's no one single act that says, okay, that act is bad faith. It's a series of acts that are bad faith. And so what you do is, the way Tony explains, is you have a bad faith bucket. And every time that they do an act or fail to do an act that they should have done, then you put that in the bad faith bucket. You document it. And the next thing they do, you document it, and you put that in the bucket. Pretty soon the bucket's full, and you hand it off to Chase, and he tears them a new one.
So, if you submit a claim and they immediately invoke the appraisal clause without ever having sent anyone out there, what I would do is, and I just had this issue on the opposite end, there's no disagreement yet. There needs to be a disagreement in order for the appraisal clause to kick in. So I would send a letter back to the insurance company, again, dropping your things in the bucket here, saying, respectfully, I appreciate the request for appraisal. However, this is not ripe for appraisal, as there's been no disagreement as of yet. Kick it back to them.
That's the reason why it's important in your supplemental claim, your reinspection request, that you specify, this is where I am, this is where you are, this is the amount in dispute. You put that information in there, so that way they can't come back later and say that, oh, we didn't know that there was a dispute. Yes, it was in my supplemental request letter. I outlined specifically exactly what was in dispute. So that's the reason why you have that. I have a number of sample letters in my book that you can use to create your own. I'm not an attorney, so you need to reword it and use your own wording, but I have a really good supplemental claim letter in there that's a reinspection request, and it says, this is where we are, this is where you are, this is the amount in dispute. And you can handle this one of three ways. You can pay it, you can send out a different adjuster who is competent and reasonable, or we can go to appraisal. Pick one. Those are the three options.
another point on writing letters, you guys are not attorneys.
That's right.
Be very careful with your wording, be very careful with the use of case law. You do not want to get hit with an unlicensed practice of law. Be very careful with your letter writing.
That's a Class A misdemeanor in Texas, by the way. You know what a Class A misdemeanor is?
5 years.
It's up to 12 months in the county jail, or a $10,000 fine, or both. Yeah, UPL, that's not good. Oh, I've got one right now. It's the most incompetent appraiser I've ever dealt with in 2,000 appraisals, almost 2,000. So this guy is an engineer in Wisconsin, and we're looking at this condo association. It's a bunch of duplexes. It's like 12 duplexes. And this engineer, he doesn't even know what hail damage looks like. He's never seen hail damage before. It became brutally obvious real quickly, and I started asking simple questions, like, do you know what you're doing?
What is your name?
And so he is an engineer.
Wow.
And so I'm curious as to whether or not they hired him to be they hired an incompetent person on purpose, if they did it on purpose or not, because it's just so bizarre. That's very atypical. Usually they try to hire people that are competent. They don't always do that. And I love having incompetent opposition. I can eat their lunch. That's pretty easy. It's not very challenging. I prefer the challenge, actually, but...
Hey, I just wanted to add something for the third-party sources for evidence and facts. How many of you guys know who ARMA is?
Ooh, yeah. That just hit Florida.
Association of Roofing Manufacturers. Not IRMA, ARMA. It's the Asphalt Roofing Manufacturer Association. They produce a book, and I actually have it here on my tablet if any of you guys want to go through it. It's the Residential Asphalt Roofing Manual, Design and Application Methods. This is where pretty much all of your manufacturers get their specifications from. And so a lot of times, at least I've run into this, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but when I'm talking about a certain manufacturer whose materials are on the project, they'll say, well, you don't have to use that manufacturer. Well, then I'll say, well, I'll just send you the ARMA book, and how about you run through that, because that's where everybody gets their installation specifications from. And this will go through and supply you with all the evidence that you need as far as anything with regards to the roofing. Because everybody, TAMCO, IKO, GAF, Certainty, Owens Corning, all of them get their information from ARMA. So you can actually go to their website, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but you can actually download this for free. No, you have to pay for it. It's like $10 though.
What is it again?
The ARMA is the Asphalt Roofing Manufacturers Association.
Does that give warranties and stuff from all the different manufacturers?
No.
No.
You gotta go to manufacturer.
I got it for free from my manufacturer's sales rep. Like if you normally buy a certain product, they'll just send it to you.
I am recommending that contractor...
Recommending? Yeah, well, not anymore.
Yep, they're mandating it. Anybody else have any questions?
I've got one.
So, you know the expiration of the holdback after the 1 year that happens in Texas and Oklahoma on every claim. How does that play into the appraisal process for you? What is your experience with that and the recovery of that after the 1 year?
Excellent question. So, are you familiar with the policy language that says that you have 365 days from the date of loss to recover recoverable depreciation, unless you do what? Ask for a 180-degree extension in writing. You have to ask for it in writing. By the way, if you read that policy language, it doesn't say before the expiration of the 365 days. It actually doesn't say that. It implies that, but it doesn't say that. And this is contract law, and you have to be specific, and you have to say things. So back to Greg's question. Typically what happens is, when things go to appraisal, it puts the 365-day time limit on hold. Although the policy doesn't state that, it puts it on hold because there's a dispute. Had there not been a dispute, then the insured could have easily have done the work and gotten the depreciation, but they weren't able to do the work because the carrier hadn't supplied it sufficient funds to be able to perform all the work, and so they weren't able to. And so I personally have never had a situation where the carrier has refused to pay recoverable depreciation after the work is completed, immediately done after the appraisal's been done. Whether or not, if the carrier refused to at that point, then you'd have to contact an attorney, but you have a very good case that you would have been happy to have done the work. There's this huge delay because the carrier refused, especially, so let's say that you have the carrier's offering, let's use this, even a small example. They're offering $10,000 to settle a residential roof claim, and you're at 30. And so the appraisal comes in at $25,000, let's say. Okay? So it's $15,000 they didn't have. It over doubles what they had before that they didn't have before. How in the world can they do $25,000 worth of work within the 365 days if they only had $10,000? They couldn't. It's not even possible. So that's the reason why I've never seen that happen to any of our clients. I'm not saying it's impossible. Yes, Chase?
A lot of policies also have a requirement that you make a written request for the recoverable depreciation within 180 days of submitting the claim. Well, good practice is include this in your letter of representation. So it's already there, it's already written. As soon as you send in your letter of rep, you're already on notice that you're making that claim.
Well, so 180 days.
This is
Thinking more, what if we're involved after the fact? You know, what if it's been,
180 days?
yes, what if we get hired at 8 months? And it's already expired.
Then go ahead and make that, notify them anyway, despite that. I mean, what's the harm?
Well, yeah.
This is, and what Chase said is particularly important in commercial. In commercial, you have to notify them that you intend to recover the depreciation. Okay? Most residential policies don't require this, but virtually every commercial policy does. And so just as soon as you're hired, immediately send off a letter that the insured, included as part of the package, the insured intends on performing all the work and recovering all recoverable depreciation.
A few weeks ago, I was talking to an umpire in our state of Michigan, and he happens to be an independent adjuster who works for all the insurance companies. Is it possible to not go into appraisal and have an umpire and just go into court, even if the insurance company has invoked that going to umpire?
What the appraisal clause says is if either party disagrees onto the amount of the loss, then either may demand appraisal. It doesn't say that one of the parties can refuse to go. It doesn't say that. So if the carrier invokes appraisal, then you're going to appraisal. In fact, you're in appraisal. Once the 20 days is up, so they have 20 days, you then have 20 days to name an appraiser. And then, once you've named an appraiser, then the two appraisers have 15 days to name an umpire, come to an agreement on an umpire, and if they can't come to an agreement on an umpire, they can continue trying to work it out, which is what we do the vast majority of the time, try to come to an agreement. But if one of the two want to run down to the judge and ask him to appoint an umpire, then they can do that after the 15 days, but they can't do it prior than the 15 days. But that's rather atypical.
Now, one of the things that, you have 26 appraisers right now, right?
Yes.
So we're going to make a link and a connection so that you can immediately from the site get right access to Steve. And if your phone number all right also on there?
Sure.
Great.
You have my card, so.
So you have on the site, you can go right to him, and why not get somebody that's highly qualified? You've got a we won't use any particular vernacular, but somebody that we don't appreciate, well, then we better put our best person forward to go after them.
Are there other people in the room here that do appraisals? Okay, you guys look around. Raise up your hands again. So there's other guys you can talk to as well. And these guys are competent, I'm sure. Otherwise, talk with them a bit, you can find out. It doesn't take you very long talking to somebody before you can figure out that they're competent or not, does it? I mean, ask them a few questions that are questions that only a competent person would be able to answer, and then you'll know very quickly.
Oh, boy.
Well, he's an independent adjuster. Basically works for the insurance companies. Isn't he sort of skewed and biased?
The video's not picking that up.
Okay, so if the carrier's appraiser, they probably are going to hire someone who is an independent, although I have them hire contractors on a regular basis, but they hire the same contractors over and over and over again, and they feed them. So to agree on the umpire, the two appraisers have to agree on an umpire. And so you don't agree on umpires that aren't going to be unbiased. So we do a vetting process where we call up the umpire candidates and we interview them, and we spend a lot of time determining whether or not they're going to be biased or not. And there's ways to ask questions that will smoke that out pretty easily if you know how to ask questions. That's the reason why another reason why you have to hire a competent appraiser, because you don't want to be stuck with a biased umpire.
Yeah. One more question right over here, and then we're going to take a break.
Okay, we all know the most appraisal clauses will go ahead and have if we can't agree on to an umpire, then we can go into the district court but who's responsible for paying that fee? I know everybody's supposed to pay 50% of the umpire fee, but a lot of times the insurance carrier's umpire or appraiser will go ahead and make the filing. I've never had a client yet ever be billed for that. Or can the client, the insured, go ahead and make the filing into the district court?
What the appraisal clause says is that each party will pay their appraiser's fees and 50% of the cost of the appraisal.
Okay.
That's what it says.
What do we think about Steve? Sarah? We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we're going to have a roundtable discussion, which we all love.